I want to give a quick introduction about ResultsPositive. And before we actually get into the specifics around both products and how they talk with each other, I'd like to actually talk about some industry observations and recommendations that we do have. If you follow the ResultsPositive blog, you'll see that we actually cover the major themes that are outlined in the World Quality Report published by HP and Capgemini on a yearly basis. Some of those industry observations we're going to actually touch upon today, just to kind of paint the picture and understand a little bit of the backdrop in terms of why HP orchestrated the interface between ALM and Agile Manager, and how that will actually help your teams to accomplish what people often refer to as Waterscrum. So a little bit about ResultsPositive. The company was founded in 2004. We are a Platinum HP partner focused on improving business execution. We've pioneered several rapid start implementation solutions around HP Quality Center, ALM Performance Center, UFT, and Agile Manager. We have a few notable customers. We're also an ASMPS support provider. So the World Quality Report, for those on the line, Capgemini, HP, and Sogeti kind of work in tandem to publish this report on a yearly basis. Sogeti is actually a wholly owned subsidiary of Capgemini that focuses predominantly on testing services. We monitor this report very closely because HP and Capgemini have a very broad reach. So they reach out and they gather industry statistics, so we kind of understand the trajectory of the marketplace. Some of the things that we want to review with you today have been the result of data gathering techniques of both Sogeti, Capgemini, and HP. One of the key things we want to point out is, I don't know if anybody has watched different YouTube videos back in the day of, how testing is dead. I think Google announced that in 2011. It was kind of a wake-up call to our industry, quality assurance and testing, in terms of what our role really is amongst the delivery of software. How do we fit in to this new paradigm? And when I say the new paradigm, there's a lot of companies that are looking to scale their agile teams, right? They might have smaller teams internally that are focused around agile development and testing, but then they also have their waterfall methodology that's really ingrained within the organization. Perhaps your organization has an ERP system that you've been testing for a very long time, or you implemented SAP or Oracle, so you're very well in tune with this waterfall methodology. However, what we're seeing and what the World Quality Report has shown us is the tester is needed more than ever within today's organizations, ranging from the proliferation of mobile devices, applications on mobile devices, to different operating systems and configurations of operating systems. We see a steady increase in QA budgets across the world, actually, not just in the United States. So the share of developers performing agile testing is actually dropping, right? So, it was before that developers were testing more, but what we're seeing now is there's more specialization around QA and testing, which lends itself to having more specialized tool sets to support that effort. So again, here are some industry observations. You've probably seen these before. QA budgets continue to rise year over year. Organizations are especially recognizing the value and power of agile software development in releasing working product. We're also seeing a lack of specialized testing methods and automation techniques. So these are type of things that continue to plague organizations, but they're working towards maturity. Also, testing within a sprint. Organizations have pointed out that the struggle to test within a 1 or 2 week sprint, the impact is often around integrations, systems talking to each other through web services, or perhaps a EDI interface or IDOC interface, and also performance testing suffers as a result. And then two other points we want to make is, all team members are starting to begin to share testing responsibilities. And scaling agile is a strategic objective for most organizations. But what we want to point out in this webinar today is the reality of now as a need for a more hybrid approach with Waterscrum. The utopia is to, scale your organization to a scaled agile framework and work within the confines of agile. But the reality is what are we working with now? And that's what we're going to show you how to do. So here's some recommendations. From the very top, we say identify your strategic goals as a QA organization. But as I just pointed out, you want to define your working procedures for what works for your team. So tailor it based on your team and what works best. You'd want to appoint a lead for automation testing and architecture. And don't forget about the fundamentals of QA and testing, such as the need for traceability and test coverage analysis reporting. This is one topic we'll speak about during the technical demo, in that ALM and Quality Center have built their reputation on having a strong foundation around requirements traceability and test coverage analysis. So I'm going to speak about how this all plays into integrating Agile Manager with a tool that has been predominantly used for waterfall delivery. And another point we want to make is, continue shifting left. I know we continue to hear shift left, but we want to encourage you to test earlier, test more often, and even incorporate some semblance of static testing into your requirements design process. And also embrace code level visibility by adopting application lifecycle intelligence. ALI is embedded within both ALM and also Agile Manager. You can actually enable ALI technology within both of these products to kind of bring up the code level visibility into your test management, project management tools. And of course, last but not least, is having the ability to really prioritize. With so many different things coming at our teams at once and so many different ideas and enhancements, change requests, everything, we have to have the capability to groom our backlog effectively and prioritize amongst our teams. So these are just kind of like, the generalized recommendations that I wanted to point out before we actually get into the crux of this webinar. So here we have it. You see Agile Manager and ALM. Two different products, right? But two different products designed to work harmoniously with one another. If you look to the left over here, you see Waterfall, you see Waterscrum Fall, and then you see Hybrid and Agile. So wherever your organization could be anywhere amongst any of these different quadrants. But the important thing to note is that depending on where your organization is, you have to be able to tailor it accordingly and tailor your delivery processes accordingly. We have seen organizations that have very large projects that are predominantly waterfall, but then they have little, what shall call mini projects within those larger projects that are based on Agile principles. So they would use Agile Manager to manage those smaller projects, but use ALM to manage the larger overall project. And we'll show you how that kind of works. Agile Manager, if you're not aware, it is available for a 30-day trial through sas.hp.com. It is an Agile project management tool designed specifically around the ability to manage your weekly or biweekly sprints, to document, identify user stories, to manage defects. It also has, as I mentioned before, inherent embedded technology called ALI, Application Lifecycle Intelligence, which connects Agile Manager to source code management and build controllers, bringing in that code level of visibility. Some of the different things, it's offered on SaaS or it's on premise. Of course, it synchronizes with ALM, as we're going to speak about today, and it also supports the ability to scale Agile throughout your organization. So a typical day in the life we have here, typical day in the life of an Agile team. Release planning, sprint execution, visibility, and insight. Today's webinar is going to really center upon visibility and insight. One of the things we have noticed is, say you don't have a tester that's designated on a Scrum team. So you're using Scrum as your methodology internally, and you don't have that designated tester as part of the team. Maybe you're offshoring it or outsourcing it, what have you. So you have a team that perhaps uses ALM to run regression testing. So in the middle of a sprint, you're going to want to understand that particular user story that has now been completed and is now changed from a status to in testing is being properly handled by your QA team that doesn't happen to be embedded within your Agile team. HP has recognized that and has architected the solution in such a way where you can kind of manage both of them in concert. We'll show you that here in a second. So here are some slides around the synchronization between Agile Manager and ALM. Agile Manager, really what it does is it takes the so you can define, and I'll show you this in the technical demo, but you can actually define the leading system versus the following system. So Agile Manager, if you're using it to document your user stories, which you should be, and you're using it as the leading system, those user stories will feed over into the requirements management module of ALM. But even more importantly, Agile Manager allows you to document your themes and features, which your user stories would kind of roll up into. So those themes and features would also reflect themselves in the requirements management module of ALM. And the traceability, too, would be in place when you create those test cases from those user stories, and then you execute those test cases from the test lab. And you'll see that in a second of how the direct cover status kind of feeds back to the user story. And some points on the bottom here, it says velocity and quality for the enterprise. So one of the key things is there's native integration between HP ALM and Agile Manager. If you think of some of the other products on the market, as an example, Jira version 1, there's the ability to synchronize those products with ALM. However, it's not a seamless integration that's in place between Agile Manager and ALM already. So it's very easy to set up. It's called the NexGen Synchronizer, and I have a few slides coming up here about that as well. Here you go. So what is coined as the NexGen Synchronizer? Essentially, think of it as a bridge between Agile Manager and ALM. So it allows you to synchronize close to real time. It's like every 30 seconds. So it's not real time, but it's pretty close. It's easy to set up. The setup and configuration, you can probably get up and running within a day, depending on how many projects and how many workspaces you're trying to integrate amongst one another between ALM and Agile Manager. It's easy to monitor. It's exception-based reporting. So if something does go wrong, if a field is not available to bring back over into AGM, as an example, an alert would kick off. And also, if you're on AGM or Agile Manager on SaaS, there's maintenance and upgrades included. So those are rolled out automatically. So here's what I was speaking about before, and I'll actually show this in real time too, but I wanted to give you a quick flavor before we actually went into it. So Agile Manager up here, if you haven't used the product before, this viewpoint or this little screenshot we're seeing here is actually the product backlog. So it's showing some user stories here, right? And it's showing an attribute called direct cover status. Now, if you're familiar with Quality Center or ALM, you're probably familiar with the direct cover status in a requirements management module. And down here, you can see, a viewpoint of the requirements management module and the user stories created down here and the associated direct cover status of each of the user stories. Basically, what happens at a high level is the user stories from Agile Manager feed over into ALM, and the status is synchronized too back and forth. So as you're tracing test cases back up to user stories, they're going to feed back into Agile Manager. So your product owners and Scrum Masters can work within Agile Manager and gain the same visibility that your QA manager, as an example, who's managing another team, might have within ALM. So some of the synchronization rules, as I mentioned before. So on the left, you see Agile Manager here in ALM QC. So over here, you can set up the rules back and forth very easily, and it's in a radio button format. So let me jump into the technical demo. So here, I'm in Agile Manager currently. I've logged into the product. And if you haven't seen Agile Manager before, I'm logged in here to the dashboard. So these are the different widgets available to you out of the box. There's many other widgets that you can add here. So a number of different widgets, a total of about 50. More widgets than what you'd have available in ALM, as a matter of fact. By clicking here, you have a number of different features with an Agile Manager, including the product backlog, release management, defect management, builds, and source code. We're going to focus our attention really around the product backlog today, and also a little bit around the actual configuration functions of the tool itself. Okay. Oops, I accidentally clicked on release management. So product backlog, you can see kind of separated into three different levels. The top level being themes, the middle level being features, and then the bottom level being your backlog. So your backlog is going to consist of everything. So user stories might be enhancements, they might be updates to design documentation, it might be defects that you're working. It's the workload that's going to be in a sprint cycle in a nutshell. So coming over to here, now that we see that I have Agile Manager open on my desktop, so picture you're a Scrum Master or a product owner, or somebody, a business analyst that's working within the confines of an Agile team. Now, over here within Internet Explorer, I have ALM open. Now this is version 12.20 of ALM. I set up a very simple demo for today, just to give everybody kind of a flavor of how this would work. So let's say, as an example, you have a large project that you have set up in application or in ALM, and that project, there's a small component of that project that's managed in an agile manner. So you're not pure waterfall, you're not pure agile, you're Waterscrum. So you have a portion of that project that's managed in an agile manner. So let's pretend, for sake of this demo, that project is just a basic property management software, and that's how we set up here. So basically what we said is, okay, we have different themes within the property management software. We have different features that make up each of those themes here. And then, of course, we have a backlog of different items. I only have 2 user stories in here now, of course, but I'm going to go ahead and walk us through a live example of adding another user story, and I want to showcase what happens on the ALM side. And you can probably already imagine what happens after we spoke about it, but I want to show you how easy it is to set up, and then how easy it is to build reporting on the ALM side to show what's happening on the AGM side. And then finally, I'll actually go into the configuration here with an Agile Manager and show you the mapping between both products. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and add a new user story. And if you haven't used Agile Manager before, you can add a user story in multiple sections. But right here, I'll just, and you can also specify a template as well. But I haven't, so I'm just going to type something in here. As a user, the ability to invite an applicant. So down here, you'd specify your application. You would specify what, so this is your theme, and these are your features under here. Priority of it, you release, and the team you'd assign it to, and then the story points. Save. Okay. So what we see here is the user story has been added. It's ranked here. We have a unique ID associated with each user story here. We have direct cover status of the user story, which is now not covered. We have, as a user, I want the ability to invite an applicant. We have the story points associated with it, the status, new, the release, the team, and the theme over here. There's other columns too that you can add to it, of course. There's a lot of different columns that you can add in here. But the purpose of this demonstration is to show you one thing in particular. So now that I've created that, on the back end, or kind of underneath, there is jobs that run every 5 seconds that are going to pick up on whatever I've added into Agile Manager, and the information is going to be transferred over into Application Lifecycle Management. So let's go back over into ALM, and let me go ahead and refresh this screen. And when this updates, let's go back over here. There we go. So this is the user story that I created over at Agile Manager. As a user, I want the ability to invite an applicant. So imagine that your team, imagine your QA team is sort of separated from your sprint team or your Scrum team, and they see another user story come through. Depending on the process that you have identified within your organization, perhaps you take a user story and you create a test case from it. You can certainly do that from the requirements management module of ALM. So you can convert this particular user story here to a single test. And I'll just do this for sake of an example. And I'll put this test into ready mode. Conversion completed. And coming down into the test plan, you can see here's the test case that I just converted. I converted this from a user story. And for sake of simplicity, I'm not going to add any design steps to it. However, you have the ability to design out this test case. And then coming into the test lab, what I'm going to do is actually move that particular test case that I just created into a test set in the test lab. As you can see, the status of that would be in no run currently. And if I come back up into here and I refresh this, I can see the direct cover status is in no run. And then coming back over into AGM, mind you, the integration is working bidirectionally. So let me just go ahead and refresh. Okay, so note how the direct cover status got picked up, from ALM back over into Agile Manager. Now, for the sake of this demonstration, pretend I'm a Scrum team. I'm working through a user story. Actually, let's go into this particular user story. And let's add a few comments here. Actually, let me define a few tasks before I do that. So within a user story, you can define a few tasks. Perhaps you want to update design documentation. Perhaps you also want to define test coverage and also perform both regression and user acceptance testing, or perhaps backwards. I'll abbreviate. And the assigned member, maybe I'll just assign myself to that, save as 3 distinct tasks, and those tasks are under the user story here. Okay. So note the status here. Status is in new. This is of the user story. And then I'm going to take you back to the main screen. I'm going to point something else out here that's very important. But note the status here. Let's actually add an acceptance test as well. And I'll call this acceptance test as now, this acceptance test feature here within AGM is meant as a standalone. This particular section here is not directly integrated with ALM. What is integrated is the direct cover status field that I'll take you back to on the previous screen. But now that I have all these set up, and let's say as an example, I'm working through, and I didn't take you through all the features of Agile Manager for this demo, but there is a planning board as well, where when you drag and drop a particular work item or a user story, the status will automatically change. But for this sake, I'm just going to go ahead and change it to in progress. And then I'm going to move it forward to in testing. Okay, so going back over to ALM, let me refresh. Okay, now that we're in ALM, the status field, I do apologize. If you guys are familiar with ALM, you know that there's different requirement types. So what I have to do is actually add the requirement type under customization to this particular user story, which is not added here. But the status of this user story would be properly reflected in ALM if it were to be added over here. But for the sake of this demonstration, let's focus on direct cover status. Coming into the test lab. Instead of actually manually running this particular test case, I'm going to go ahead and just flip it over to past. And coming back up here, you can see traceability is in place. Therefore, with traceability in place between the user story and the test case, the direct cover status has changed to past. Let's go back over into Agile Manager and check to see if that has fed back yet. So I'll go ahead and refresh. And Agile Manager will auto-refresh if you leave it on your backlog screen. If your team is working with an Agile Manager, your Scrum Master, your product owner, or your business analyst for that matter, and they want to move ahead with a particular work item or deem it as done, that should come back over. So note up here, direct cover status is now in past, and now you can go ahead and change the status of this to done. Okay, so one other point I want to make here is you actually have the ability, and I'll show you this under the hood when we go into project customization. You can define your definition of done within Agile Manager. And part of that definition of done is actually the ability to enforce AGM not to allow you to put a user story in done until each of the tasks have been completed as marked as completed within the user story. And that's what we just saw there, and I'll show you that here in a second. But under the hood, we are now in customization of Agile Manager. Coming into integrations, you can see the synchronization or the Synchronizer subtab under integrations. When you sign up for Agile Manager, you can get a 30-day free trial at sas.hp.com. Out of the box, as soon as you sign up, you probably won't see this. You'll have to request it. You'll submit a ticket, and this will become available to you. What you need to do to enable integration between Agile Manager and ALM is you actually have to install sort of like a bridge, right? It's called the Dev Bridge. And essentially what it is, it's your endpoint credentials manager. You plug in information from ALM, and then you integrate projects within ALM to workspaces with an Agile Manager. Pretty easy to set up. You can operate it in a Windows environment like we have here. We happen to set up a separate virtual machine for this particular demonstration. But over here, under integrations, under the Synchronizer subtab, you can see that I set this up, so it's already baked for the purposes of demonstration, but I'll show you the field mapping and the rules that I spoke about before. So out of the box, what Agile Manager and ALM do is they map the most important fields together that you're going to need to sync back and forth. So I only demonstrated the direct cover status. However, Agile Manager and ALM also can sync up your defects as well. So if you're logging defects with an Agile Manager, your team is, that can go ahead and flow over into ALM and vice versa. So if you have a team that's separated from your Agile team that's testing and logging defects, those defects will actually flow back into Agile Manager. And you can set all of that up here. You can actually change the direction. You can change the dominant endpoint as well. Under requirements, remember how I spoke about 3 different levels of requirements with an Agile Manager? Your themes, your features, and your user stories. Well, you have the ability here to actually create different levels of requirements that will map back and forth between Agile Manager and ALM. For the sake of this demonstration, what I did in ALM prior to this particular webinar is I set up different requirement types for user story, feature, and theme, and then I mapped them accordingly. So all that information sort of feeds back and forth. And you can see here, there's exception-based reporting around data integrity issues that you might have between the two systems. What we see here is a data integrity issue, and the fact that I added a release to Agile Manager earlier today, and I did not replicate that release manually in ALM. So that's one thing you have to be aware of, is the release replication or the release synchronization is not automated. There's a manual component where you have to actually add the releases over into ALM. So coming back over into ALM under management, if I go to releases, you can see I have a release set here and then a sprint underneath this particular release. On the Agile Manager side, I actually had 3.2 designated as well, and when Agile Manager attempted to sync that up with ALM, it failed, and it actually threw that particular exception here. So you can monitor these exceptions as an administrator, or what you can also do is lock down your security settings so only certain people within your organization or within your teams have the ability to add releases to ensure that both systems are kind of in sync. So the overall key takeaways from this particular demonstration is your ability to take HP Agile Manager and synchronize it effectively with ALM, in the sense that perhaps your organization has a lot of process and procedure built around application lifecycle management for your waterfall projects. And you have a very established QA team, and you're trying to think of ways to incorporate that QA team into your Scrum methodologies and principles. So with Agile Manager and ALM synchronized and working together, you can effectively incorporate the activities of your testers with the activities of your Scrum team in specific sprint cycles.